Well, Mr. Calvin, we're at your home in the Ridge Road in Champlain once again as we get ready for a brand new month of March 2008. I came back from Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, where it was 85 degrees into a, well, I won't say a massive snowstorm, but a few inches of new snow, and the prospect of temperatures below zero. So ask me if we're ready for spring 2008.
Well, coming back to new snow in this winter is nothing to brag about. Every time you turn around, we're getting
record snows in the North Country, and we talk about the snows we had when we were kids, but as I saw somebody in television say, when we were kids, we were this big.
Well, so I don't care how big you were. We apparently just passed the record for 1958, but I think in 58 we didn't get a lot of melting like we have here. You look out in the field and you can't tell that we've gotten 36 inches of snow. We get some and it melts, and we get some and it melts.
Sure.
But that year sticks out in my mind because my Aunt Rita Bayshard, whose house we will see when we're going through today's book, died that year in 1958. And the air base came down with the snowblower. They were snowblowing the area, and Manny St. John, who was the highway superintendent at the time, made sure they came through here so my mother could go to the funeral.
No kidding, that's how bad it was.
Yeah, and I think I've mentioned before that playing outside where we're looking right here, the snow was so high that I, as a 10-year-old, I could reach up and touch the wires if I was foolish enough to do it on the electric and telephone poles.
Well, we've often mentioned that, and people look at you like you're kind of strange, because nowadays they have all kinds of ways to chop up the snow and load it on dump trucks and take it away. In those days, they get it to the side of the road, and the snowbanks were very often 10 or 12 or 15 feet high. Yeah, they had those old V-plows.
V-plow. I'd get out, jump off the snowbank, make sure nothing was coming, and I'd have to keep an eye out, because if the plow was coming, there was no place to get out of on the side all the way. The plow was touching both banks. And
think about that, kids, when you're walking home from school. Isn't it amazing?
So we may have had 100 inches of snow this year, but there's not much of it on the ground at any given time. Back in that era, we had very little melting, and that snow was high.
And that's very true. We've talked about that often with our friends who are meteorologists, John Hart in particular, because we've had the snow and then melting, and even in a recent storm that we had toward the end of February, we may have gotten 5.5 inches of snow where I live, but 2 or 3 of those inches melted as it hit the ground because temperatures were in the 30s when it fell.
Right.
So you ended up with 3 or 4, and the next day, and it was easy to clean out, and that's nothing. My snowblower almost knows where to turn these days. In any case, we're here again. We did Chapter 1 of the Pioneer Homes of Clinton County, 1790 to 1820, by the late Dr. Allen S. Everest, who was an icon in terms of local and Adirondack history, having been a lecturer, professor, a student of history, and a wonderful writer. And he wrote these books, did a couple editions, first one 1966, right?
Well, he's done 2 separate books. This was a reprint of the 66 edition that I've got here. But he did do another a book called, I think it's Architecture Worth Preserving or something. Exactly. So it's a separate entity than this.
But these are the Pioneer Homes, and we covered quite a few of them before the time ran out. We decided we'd come back, and it's taken a few weeks, a little water over the proverbial hometown cable, our little corner dam since then, but we're back. And amazingly, my theory is that everything's connected if you pay attention to those connections. And I was in the post office this morning, and a wonderful lady walked up to me and shook my hand, introduced herself. She's a nurse. Her husband's a doctor. They moved here in 1980, and they happened to buy the old Morrison homestead in Morrisonville. And we're going to get to that house today.
It's in there.
And it's in there. So everything's connected. We'll mention her name a little bit later on. So where do we begin? Where did we leave off?
I begin by taking a cough drop, and hopefully I'll be able to get through this.
Well, as we record this program, as I said, on what would normally be the last day of February, except for leap year in 2008, there are some terrible bugs going around the North Country. The intestinal thing, as we learned on the news today, has killed 3 people in a nursing home in Essex County. It was either that or the remnants of that good hot Mexican food that got to my intestines when we got back from Cabo San Lucas. But I feel good now.
Don't breathe on me then.
No, I won't. But there are a lot of illnesses. The warm and the cold weather, and a lot of kids are. I see in the news they're asking all kids to get flu shots now, and so anyway.
I just worry that everybody else gets a flu shot and I don't have to. So.
Maybe that's a good thing. All right, so where are we? Page 54, is that where we are?
Yep, we're starting off with number 89. It's the Thurber home, what we commonly refer to as the Thurber Inn. And as we did last time, we'll let you read, and I'll once in a while throw in something because I don't know a lot, but
you know a lot more than I do, especially
I believe I do,
especially about the homes up here in the northern tier.
And if last time we had the James Madison, James Monroe thing, your book said one and my book said the other, and I looked it up.
Oh, you did?
And the year was 1817 that this president supposedly stayed. I think it was the Kent Delord House, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I looked it up, and 1817 was the year when we had the transition, so they were both president in 1817, Madison and Monroe. So
who knows?
Well, I think
somebody else did the same thing when they wrote that. I think maybe
the corrected version is correct. So whatever we said, but while I'm looking out for your mistakes, please keep an ear out for mine, because I noticed when I was putting that program together that we were talking about Dr. Everest, and I mentioned Dr. Kellogg. And
he was a fan of Dr. Kellogg's, who was a generation before him.
Right, but I gave Kellogg at that point the credit for putting this book together.
Oh, boy.
So I corrected it on the picture, but the verbal part is still
They were both doctors, and we've talked about Dr. Kellogg often, and
I do know the difference, too.
Yeah, and I do, too, but sometimes, yes, we have made an occasional faux pas. So let us begin with house number 89, and I might mention that if our viewers see a picture after Calvin gets finished recording today, he will put a picture on the screen for every one of these pictures we're talking about. That's a massive production effort when you don't have a great deal of time in multi-million-dollar production studios. But if you see your house or house of a neighbor, or know something about one of these houses that you think would fill in the blanks later on, we're always open to new ideas, so let us know. I'm sure many of these homes are occupied. Some are not even existing anymore. They've been gone or moved or turned into something else. So the Thurber home on Lake Street, the original owner, General Ezra Thurber. It dates to 1818. The owner, when the book was printed, was Harold LeBrock. Ezra came to town in 1797 and prospered, becoming a man of importance in civil and military affairs. His military rank was in the militia. In his home prior to this one, he entertained President Monroe for breakfast in 1817.
No.
Anyway, he moved into this house in 1818, owned the first piano in town. How's that for a rare distinction? His home served in recent years as the General Thurber Inn. It still exists, right?
Yes. Well, it's not an inn, but this home is presently owned and occupied by Les Matthews. And I almost think that it's brick, and I think this looks like painted brick to me, and I think it's brick again, but I'd have to drive by it to make sure, because there's so many nice homes through there that sometimes you see one home, but I do know it's right on the corner, and it's owned by Les Matthews. But let's hope it was Monroe here in 1817. I'm looking for the Kent Delord house here while we were talking, and we should point out again for people who didn't see that first part that this book was put out by the Clinton County Historical Association.
Oh, exactly, and gave us the rights to sit here and talk about it with pleasure and a blessing.
And our plan was, both times we had hoped to get Ken Ray here from the County Museum, not actually here, go there. And both times it didn't work out. We were supposed to do it yesterday.
Snowstorm.
And the snowstorm kind of scared Ken away from the museum, so we weren't able to go down there. And we're at a point right now where sometimes we have shows that we've done, and we've got a cushion of 6, 7 weeks. Well, we're not in that era right now. We're in an era where, because of Gordy going on several trips and because of the weather, we're kind of doing these shows very close to when they appear on TV. So we didn't have a cushion, so we have to do this one without the benefit of Ken Ray, and I'm sorry, because I'd rather see Ken appear
Ken's a
than
good
me.
friend. We had to cajole and beg him to go on television the first time, and once he did, he felt right at home at it, and we had so much fun looking at old photographs. We'll talk to Ken again. There's no question.
We're scheduled for next week, so let's hope
okay.
it pans out.
Number 90 is the Stone Schoolhouse on Champlain Street, originally built as a school, 1816. Leon LaFontaine owned it when this book was written. It says, "This is Rouse's Point's oldest school building. Classes previously being conducted in various homes at least as early as 1801. This building was also used as a meeting house by Baptists, Methodists, and Presbyterians." Is the building still there? Do you know?
It's still there. It's still occupied by the LaFountain family. Leon passed away a few years ago. Leon was a participant in, I believe it was Iwo Jima that we did a show with Leon.
Oh, the anniversary of Iwo Jima. It was just a very few days ago, and I decried the fact with some of my friends who are Marines that the media almost neglected to even mention.
As we get further and further away, and memories fade, and there may even come a day when Pearl Harbor isn't recognized anymore. But
well, look what we're, as long as you brought it up, look what we don't talk very much about World War I, the Great War anymore, and we did have 2 surviving veterans, and now we have only 1 who is 107 years old, and it just seems like such ancient history, but it was only a few years old the year I was born, so of course we think a lot about it, and the war, all the other wars going back to 1812 when neither one of us were even dreamed about. All right.
And the French and Indian and so on.
And all the
as far as I know, Mrs. LaFountain is still living there, and there is a marker there.
There is a historic marker
on Champlain Street, and right next to there was an old church that was torn down within the last 5 to 10 years. That was a lot of people thought historic, but a lot of these old buildings just cost more to preserve, and
absolutely.
So the owners decided to demolish that church, which was very close, almost on the same lot as the LaFountain home.
I might mention while we're here, and this is an aside, but I think an important aside. We keep telling families to do things together. Go to church together, have dinner together, talk about your day. Put the kids in the car in the springtime or summer and drive around to look at some of these old homes, remembering what you saw on television and describing it. You might drive by that house, for example, and not have any idea that it was once a schoolhouse and that it was one of the oldest, or the oldest building, the oldest school building in Rouse's Point. So take a ride around and look at it. Snap a couple of now pictures.
That's right. And these books are available for perusing at the Clinton County Historical Association, so stop in. Maybe
we can convince them to reprint it again.
And that word perusing was out of my mouth before I realized I used it. Whenever I'm in my car, I'm listening to talk radio, and I listened to Dennis Miller the other day.
Oh, yeah.
And he said that he's going to start doing this series on words that we misuse. And apparently peruse is one of those. Peruse, to me, means kind of scan through it. But peruse, according to what he said, is read it thoroughly and diligently to really study it.
Oh, you see, we've added new meanings strictly by popular usage over the years, and a lot of words that were very popular 100 years ago are not used at all anymore. Occasionally I'll put a word in my column and somebody will call up and says, "What the heck does that mean?"
What's that word?
I use the word treatise in a column, and somebody who went to Brockport for 5 years called up and said, "We had no idea what that is because we never use a dictionary except for Scrabble." And my wife and I looked it up, and we learned a new word. Thank you very much. So anyway, let's go on.
Well, unfortunately, the vocabulary of a lot of people includes a lot of 4-letter words. And
that's true too in this day and age, and we're not except for a few people, and William F. Buckley Jr. just died a day before we're recording this program. One of the most erudite, glib, outspoken people I ever saw, and as a youngster wanting to get into the radio business, that very deep voice of his and those great giant eyeballs when he was involved in a big discussion with somebody, the fact that his head would move up and down. But what a brilliant man. And he and other people tended to promote the language in education, something that we can talk about as often as we can.
And as a conservative, I'm proud that he was a conservative, because listening to him, I felt, taught me a lot about.
And everybody else. And everybody else. And the man was, here's another word, prolific in his writings and his speeches, over 50 speeches a year on college campuses. He wrote dozens of books. Hundreds, maybe 100 or more books. But he wrote thousands of columns. And he never stopped. He was at his desk writing, even though he was almost retired. He was at his desk writing when he died at the age of 82. And boy, they broke the mold when he was done.
Yep.
Regardless of your politics, you have to admire anybody who has an opinion and sticks to it. Very interesting. In light of this very volatile election year that we're going through, and regardless of your politics, you look at this guy, and I, of course, grew up with him, and the first time I ever saw him on television, I was astounded and blown away just by his style.
And I years ago, I voted for his brother James Buckley for state senate.
We can't hold that against you, Calvin. All right, we're at the 90. We've got 2 done so far. The first 20 minutes. Oh boy, number 91 is the Smith's Homestead, 326 Lake Street. We're in the village of Rouse's Point. Original owner Joel Smith, 1815. Andrew Broadwell owned it when this book was written. It says Joel bought the farm in 1811, and after building this house, held on to it till 1825. Ezra Thurber bought it. One of his renters was Holland Turner, first Baptist preacher in town, who conducted a school in the house. After 1840, Peter Luck occupied the property for many years.
I did know who owned it recently, but I can't remember. I think
we won't hold that against you either.
Mr. Broadwell, I think it was Mrs. Broadwell, left us not that long ago, and I remember Cavanaugh Realty selling that home, but I can't remember who the buyer is. Right
your
now.
phone will ring as this program's on the air.
Joey Trombley will call me and tell me.
Oh yeah. Number 92 is the Fitch home, Route 9B. The original owner, Solomon Fitch. He dates to 1810. Was owned by Paul, how would you pronounce that?
Schweiner.
Okay. Schweiner. Choiniere. Solomon settled in town in 1807. In 1846, he deeded this farm to his son-in-law, Richard Swinburne, not Schweiner. It's changed hands many times since the Swinburnes. The Schweiners have owned it since 1931, it said. Are they still there now, do you think?
I'm pretty sure Paul's son lives there. And if you recall, when you and I talked last time and did the first part of this, I mentioned that in the obituaries was one of the homeowners, and it was Paul Schweiner who died.
Oh, no kidding.
Just about a week or 10 days ago as we were taping this. But his son, as far as I know, lives there, and another generation has grown up there in the meantime.
That's great. The next one is the Williams Homestead on Route 9B. The original owner, Jesse Williams, dates to 1805. And the owner in 1966 was Oscar Bayshard. Jesse settled in town in 1800, bought a farm, which he sold in 1818. In 1852, Moses Yale, who had an adjoining farm, bought it, then lived on it for a time after his home burned. Yale deeded it to his daughter, Mrs. Ebenezer Stearns, from whom the Hewitts bought it in 1863.
Now, this is the place where my Aunt Rita lived. Oscar Bayshard was my uncle through marriage. And this is the home where I'm sure you knew her, Carol Wallet.
Oh, yes.
Grew up.
Didn't we all know her and admire her and grieved over her very untimely death from cancer as a young woman?
Very young. She was only 49 when it happened, and she and I grew up together. And It was a tough thing to go through.
Oh yeah.
And Bill Bayshard, her brother, is a hockey coach at Beekman Town. That's where Bill grew up.
Oh yeah.
And as far as I know, it's the Tatro family that owns it. They got it after the Bayshards.
Okay. Number 94, the Hayford homestead on the Hayford Road. John Hayford, the original owner when it was built in 1806. Armand Lauren owned it. Is still there, maybe?
No, Armand's not with us anymore. Armand Laurent is how we would
Laurent?
have. Well,
okay.
but they all call it Lauren now.
Lauren now, yeah.
I grew up saying Laurent. None of the Laurens like to be called Laurents. It's like the Bidors, and they want to be Bedards, and it just the French pronunciation of some of these names, or what we think is pseudo-French pronunciations, but everybody I know who's a Lauren wants to be called Lauren, not Laurent.
Lauren, how interesting. So John came to town in 1802 and bought a large farm. Eventually the Hayford Road came to have several Hayford homes on it. This one remained in the family for most of the 19th century.
Hayford, I think, was he was an early postmaster. We'd have to check the Champlain book. His name is mentioned in there, and I'm pretty sure he was an early postmaster in the Champlain era.
Next is the Stearns Ashline homestead on Route 11. That's number 95, if you're following along in your hymn book. The original owner was Clark Stearns. The house was built in 1806, and the owner in 1966 was Clarence Ashline. Hannah Leonard visited her married sister in town about 1800, and while she was there, she served as the town's first school teacher. In 1801, she also bought a farm, returned to Massachusetts, married Clark Stearns, and they settled permanently on this property. And since 1915, it said it's been in the Ashline family. I don't know if it still is or not.
As far as I know, Junior Ashline is still living there. They lost a little bit of their front yard that faces Route 11 when the state came through and redid that intersection next to the Fairbanks Road, and so now they're they can kind of, not that they would, but they can kind of look out their window and spit on the cars going by. That's how close they are to the road now.
It's nice that some of these homes do have historical markers, but many of them do not. And many of them are not really very distinct structures until you see the picture. You may not even know that it is an historic home. But we're talking, 200. This one, for example, 202 years ago is we're recording this in 2008. Next, 96, the Leonard homestead on Route 11. Caleb Leonard lived from 1781 to 1864, built it in 1807. In 1966, it was owned by Leslie Edgerton.
This is Edgerton. I'm just wondering if that was supposed to be Edgerton.
I don't know. But Caleb followed his sister Hannah Stearns to town in 1807. She sold him part of her farm. His original home was the back part of the present structure, off the picture to the left, now used as a garage, and the front section was added later.
As you said, sometimes you don't recognize the home. I'm almost thinking this is where the Passanos live, but I don't want to put that out for sure.
Well, you'll find out.
I'm sure. If they're watching, they'll let me know.
Okay, number 97 on page 58 is the Slater Stearns homestead on the Hayford Road. Jonathan Slater built it in 1810. George Bedard owned it in 1966. Slater settled in town in 1799, carved out a farm for himself. 1852, Ebenezer Stearns, later his brother Leonard, owned the property. Leonard rebuilt the house during the 1860s, but left the original lines intact. And I always appreciate that. We talked about that earlier with other homes. I love it when somebody buys a home and restores it and maintains what I call the architectural integrity. That's beautiful. Okay, now, number 98 is the Weeks Delano home on Church Street. The original owner, Joseph Weeks, 1815. Roy Delano owned it when this book was written. And Joseph came to town in about 1803. His first permanent home was the back part of the present structure. His son Joseph added the front section about mid-century. Present owner married a great-granddaughter of the first Joseph, so the property is now occupied, that would have been 1966, by fifth and sixth generations of the original settler. That's kind of neat when that happens, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. We were very fortunate. The historical group in Rouse's Point did a program with Roy Delano, and he gave an interesting little interview for about 50 some odd minutes, and it's great to have that on tape and available to share with the public once in a while.
Oh, that's great. Number 99 and 99A, a larger picture and an inset, if you will, is a a wonderful building that we've talked so much about that we love. I know Calvin is particularly attracted to it, introduced me to it some years ago because of its pivotal role in the War of 1812. So, Dewey's Tavern, intersection of the Prospect Hill Road and Route 348. Elias Dewey was the original owner. It's one of the oldest homes we'll talk about because it was built in 1800, and George Bedard owned it. Who owns it now?
Louis and Rita Bedard.
There, oh, okay. Situated, this is 3 paragraphs, so you know they paid attention to it. Situated on the main route to Canada, Mr. Dewey prospered with a 15-room tavern. His original home survives as a pigsty on the farm, and that's the smaller building we mentioned. Dewey produced his own wool and flax and also made potash. The tavern was in the path of skirmishes and scouting expeditions during the War of 1812. British and American officers stayed here. Fearful of the need to flee, the family packed its possessions. A suspicious British officer ran his sword through the cartons and chipped a mirror, which is now owned by a descendant, Miss Helen Barber of Plattsburgh, who also owns the family portraits. Important war conferences were held in this building, including 2 for the making of prisoner of war treaties in 1814. Part of the British Army camped nearby on its way to Plattsburgh, and on its retreat, some of the wounded were brought here. It's one of the most historic homes in the county. Alan F. Everest recognized it as such.
And in the 1988 book put out by the Bicentennial Committee, the Clinton County Pictorial History, and Alan Everest was one of the ones putting that together. It is called the most historic building still standing. It was Elias Dewey's Tavern. So it wasn't. He upgraded it from one of the most to the most historic building still standing in the area.
And fortunately, we recognize that every year during our coverage of the Battle of Plattsburgh. You go up there, and there's normally a little celebration there, or a commemoration, if you will.
Yeah, they started doing that. Well, we did one kind of on our own a few years
yes,
back.
We did.
Then a couple of years ago, they through Celine Paquette and David Patrick and others, and through the bidding of the Bicentennial Committee, they've encouraged this ceremony that has taken place for the past couple of years in front of Louis and Rita Bedard's home right on their lawn, and they're very gracious hosts. But there's going to come a time when Louis and Rita aren't the owners anymore, and so we're very happy that as you're moving to the south from that building, it mentions that in this article here that the prisoners of wars, the wounded ones, not the prisoners, but the wounded soldiers were brought here. And it doesn't mention it here, but the ones who died at Dewey Tavern are buried across from Northeastern Clinton Central School, and the site of that cemetery is now owned through the efforts of the Bob Venn Park Committee by the town of Champlain, and that historical significance will be recognized more and more in the coming years. So through the generosity of the Venn family and the Bedards and the community of in our area who helped the fundraising for the Bob Venn Park, the town now owns that site, and I think that's a very significant piece to preserve for the future, and the fact that it's located right across from the school.
Right across. We've talked about it often on our program. We did a surveying show there one time. It was very interesting.
And just to change it just a bit, because I had mentioned this book, I was glancing through there today because I wanted to see exactly what Dr. Everest said about Dewey Tavern in here. And look at the map I found, Gordy. Remember how proud I was last time you were here?
Yes.
For finding that little map in this booklet that I bought.
Well, you found it again, the same
here
map.
It is in this book that's available to everybody. there is Pike's Cantonment again. And so obviously it's not a secret. You don't need to buy that book from 1914 to find it, because
there it is again.
It's right here. So Pike's Cantonment is shown there. So if you're interested in seeing where Pike's Cantonment was, according to a 1914 map, it's available here at Clinton County at Pictorial History. And if you can't find one at County Museum, send
Calvin a stamp and a $100 bill.
Nancy Donahoe might have one.
Cornerstone Bookstore, Margaret Street in Plattsburgh.
But try the Historical Association, because they help put this out. And if not, I'm sure they have one that you could look through if you want to look through it. And it's definitely a good.
There might be a copy in your local public library.
Right, but don't come to Calvin's library.
No, not to Calvin's. No. Okay, now I think we're on the Hamilton Homestead, Route 348 north of the Prospect Hill Road. Original owner was Elias Hamilton, built in 1805. Arthur Grimshaw owned it when this book was written. Elias settled in town in 1800, bought a farm. While the British retreated from Plattsburgh, they stopped in the neighborhood for rest and food. By tradition, two soldiers got into a fight in this home and shattered a door, which was kept in the attic for years. I didn't know that. It's too bad the door's not still around, huh? Somebody said, what's that old door doing up there?
Let's burn that door.
Isn't that an interesting story?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Like cannonballs in walls and things in cellars, and there you go with a shattered door.
I'm not sure. I can guess who's in there now, but I don't want to guess wrong, so I'm not gonna touch that.
Okay, next one, 101. This is the Fox Farm on Route 348 north of the Prospect Hill Road. Thomas Fox owned it when it was built in 1805. 1966, the owner was Mrs. William, is it Coach?
Nope, Coash.
Coash. C-O-A-C-H-E, Coash. Thomas settled in town in 1800. The farm remained in his family till 1871. It was in the Coash family since 1910. Still is, you think?
I don't think so. I think somebody has bought that. We can check with Bill Favreau, because his mother Rose would have grown up in that house.
Yep.
Rose Favreau. But check with Bill Favreau. Ask him who owns his grandmother's
okay,
home.
We'll do that. Next is a Bertrand Schoolcraft home, Route 348 near the Canadian border. That looks like a stone house. Original owner, perhaps, John Van Fleet, V-L-I-E-T, dates 1815. George Bedard owned it in 1966. Canadians from Odelltown apparently were the first owners of the house. It passed through several hands between 1823 and 1847 when Isaac Bertrand bought it. Freeman Schoolcraft acquired it in 1869.
I happen to know who owns this one because I bought a George Bedard milk bottle from.
Did you really?
From the owner. It's on eBay. In fact, Jim was kind enough to sell me two after I got there. I said, "You got another one?" He says, "Well, I got two more, but I want to keep one." So he sold me two of them, and I gave the other one to my brother Sam. But it's Jim Rabideau is the owner. And every once in a while, he'll find something else unique hanging around there, and he'll
isn't that interesting?
And he'll put it for sale. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. At least it's like there's a giant auction going on out in Los Angeles and Hollywood of memorabilia as we're doing this program of, well, like the witch's hat from the Wizard of Oz, and the guns and various all the Beatles clothes and Elvis memorabilia. It just drives you crazy when you see it. But there's no way Calvin or Gordy Little can afford any of that stuff, because some of the stuff, like the gun that was used to shoot Lee Harvey Oswald, will go for 7 figures. Figure it out. People are attracted to macabre things like that. I certainly wouldn't be.
No.
Okay, number 103, the Moore Homestead in Champlain. There's, is it Pliny or Pliny? I always call it Pliny.
I've heard it. Plenty to me sounds so much more like plenty and plenty more, but I've heard it said both ways. I think most of the time when I say it, I say Pliny, but I've heard it's
Mr. Moore had it.
Pliny or Pliny. I don't think he minds.
No, it was dated to 1800 to 1801. Charles McClellan,
McClellan.
A very popular North Country name for many reasons, owned it when this book was written. And Moore, veteran of the Revolutionary War, led the first band of settlers to Champlain in 1788, built this colonial home with Palladian window, modeled after one he liked in Vermont. He not only founded the town, but was its leading citizen throughout his life. His great-granddaughter married Charles McClellan, so the present owner represents the sixth generation of the same family. The house burned in 1912. Hugh McClellan, son of the owner, had made careful drawings while studying architecture, so the reconstruction of 1913-14 produced a building identical to the original. The L of the present building dates from 1802, was a separate building which escaped the fire and was moved to its present location during the reconstruction.
Now, obviously, sneaking this building in isn't quite accurate because it had burned, and it's only 100 years old right now as we're speaking, not 200 years old. But it has been throughout my memory a home of the Clark Funeral Home.
Absolutely.
And it still is.
Been there many times. It's still a beautiful structure.
Oh, it certainly is.
Once again, we have to salute those people who saved the architectural drawings and reconstructed it exactly.
Yeah.
Because many historic homes that are now open to the public are so rebuilt, reconstructed, even though they might be identical, there's very little of the original structure left.
Yep, and Earl and Marilyn Parsons and their family lived there for years, and they certainly were very conscientious of the history of that building.
Wasn't there a gazebo that dated back?
Well, there is a gazebo that David Patrick is trying to preserve, but you have to wonder how much. This is he called it a summer house, and all it is a gazebo. You have to wonder about how many actual boards from that original structure are still.
That's why I brought it up.
Thanks.
All right.
And he did get a $10,000 grant.
Oh, did he? Good for David.
To help preserve it.
Anyway, number 104, the Moore farmhouse in Champlain. Mr. Pliny or Pliny Moore, original owner in 1800. Is it Ulrich Racine?
That'd be my guess.
Okay.
That's Celine. It's her father.
Oh, it is. Okay.
No, yeah. No, her grandfather. Excuse me.
Grandfather. By reputation, the oldest house in Champlain. It was built on Moore's farm outside the village. He built of stone, which explains the reference to the Stone House farm. The modern siding covers the original stone. At his death, the farm went to his son-in-law, Reverend Abraham Brinkerhoff. 1835, it became the home of Freeman Nye.
Now, this is on Prospect Hill Road, and that's how far away. It's quite a distance, a couple miles from the Dewey Tavern, but there were soldiers camped this far away during that Battle of Plattsburgh. Not during it, but
that time period.
Yeah,
yep.
As they prepared for the Battle of Plattsburgh, and the Racine family is still in there.
On page 62 is house number 105, the Whiteside home in Champlain. The original owner was Alexander Whiteside, who built it in 1816. Alfred Gagnon or Gagnon?
Gagnon.
Gagnon? Take your pick on how to pronounce the name.
Alfred Gagnon.
Gagnon, okay. Fine home with Palladian window and hipped roof. I love this house. Beautifully designed inside and out. Mr. Whiteside married a daughter of Pliny Moore and ran a paper mill in town. So there you go. The Perry Kaufman home in Perry's Mills. The original owner, George Perry, 1820. Maurice Kaufman owned it in 1966. Originally known as the, boy, there's a good one for you, Schieffelin's Mills, maybe?
Schieffelin's.
Schieffelin's, S-C-H-E-I-F. The name was changed when the mill privileges were acquired by George Perry in 1819. One time he owned the extensive mills and many of the dwellings of the village. The Perry family sold this house to George Kaufman in the 1880s.
As far as I know, the Kaufmans still habitat it.
Dudley's Grove, Route 11. How about this house? The original owner, Moses Dudley, who died in 1846. The date is 1815. The owners, when the book was written, were Mrs. Mary and Maud Dudley.
That's two misses.
Yeah.
One miss and another miss, not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we know that because we're looking at it, but the people listening.
Not near misses.
Yeah, Miss Mary and Miss Maud.
All right. The wooden L was the original home. the store. That's the doorway flanked by the small windows, which you'll see in the picture, which was being operated at least by 1822. The shelving is still intact, it says. The main brick part and the sheds were later additions by George the son. Moses and his sons became large property owners and operators of a sawmill. Fourth generation descendants occupy the property today.
This home is no longer on Route 11. When they redid Route 11, they bypassed this little section. It's now owned by Paul and Linda Seymour. And moving Route 11 from this road was very popular with the area, because I can remember going to look at a tree that was hit by a group of young people, or late teens, early 20s, and I think 3 or 4 of them died in that tree. And so when they straightened up Route 11, this was one of the areas that they straightened out and removed from Route 11.
Aha.
So it's a very sad place.
Yeah, I imagine. So the next one is the post home on Route 11. The original owner, Moses Dudley, again, built in 1818, and the owners when the book was written were Mr. and Mrs. Howard Post. Already the owner of his home farm, Moses bought this site in 1815, probably erected this building as a tenant house for his growing estate. No Dudley seemed to have lived here until recently. Present owners have tastefully restored it. It says Mrs. Post was Marion Dudley of the 5th generation.
This looks to me like it might be Toogie and Helen Roberts' home.
Okay. Boy, you're sticking your neck out.
Near the Southwick Road.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
Next is number 109, the Rogers Homestead on Route 9. The original owner, L. Nathan Rogers. There's a new name for me. L. Nathan Rogers, 1800. Present owner when the book was written was Exemer Boyer. Rogers, a brother-in-law of Pliny Moore, was one of the original settlers in 1788. This house was originally brick, but the present owner replaced the brick with clapboard and added a south wing. The Rogers heirs owned the farm until about 50 years ago, where the present owners bought it, it says.
It remained in the Boyer family for a long time, and I'm not sure if the Boyers still own it or who exactly is living in that particular spot.
The next one is the Kellogg Homestead on Route 9. Daniel Kellogg built it in 1810. Trefley. Is it Trefley? Okay, Trefley.
Like
Trefle. I'm glad you're here to straighten me out. Trefley Tremblay owned it when the book was written. Kellogg came to Champlain in 1800, founded a famous family. One grandson was both the first U.S. Senator from Nevada and appellate judge in New York. During the 1920s, this home was a station in the liquor traffic. Well, how about that? And fatal shootings occurred in the yard.
There was only one fatal shooting. A young fellow who was there as an employee of the owner was fatally shot. And
I wonder why our late doctor put.
There was quite a few shots fired, but only one person.
I see what you mean.
And
okay,
this was covered in. If you've ever seen our program,
yes.
Part 2 of our bootleggers.
That was a great show.
We camp out there, and this actually, if you look out my window here and look at a silo out there, that's where that farm is located.
Oh, so no kidding!
Where we're sitting here, it's probably a mile or so as a crow flies.
In that direction.
East of here.
Oh, so interesting. And this one is the Shoot or Shut?
I'm going to say Shoot.
Shoot, S-H-U-T-E homestead in Coopersville. William Shute. Date 1810. Present owner Oral Bayshard. Mr. Shute came to town. You think it is Shute, huh?
Well, I got an E in the end. I don't know.
Came here in 1800. His home served as one of the meeting places of the Baptist congregation in 1823 and thereafter. Remained in the Shute family till 1911, when the Bayshards acquired it.
Last I heard, the Lauren family owned it, and I'm not quite sure because they were using it as one of their outlying farms, so I'm not sure. It's a kind of a unique structure. It looks unique here, and it is too as you drive up and around.
With the little eye windows up above.
It's up on a corner, and it kind of stands out.
Yeah. The next one is the North Homestead on the Rapids Road, owned by Abijah North? Boy, Abijah. Abijah. Built in 1810. Albert Ashline owned it when this book was written. Abijah came to Champlain in 1799. He and his brother acquired a farm, 720 acres. Abijah's son, Lemuel, made this one of the most productive farms in town, raised fine stock, sold some horses for as much as $7,500. Dormer and porch are modern additions to the house.
I'm not quite sure who lives there. I'm not quite sure which structure it is.
Oh, well, they will have to make a driving tour.
Although I knew Albert Ashline quite well.
Yeah.
But,
this is the Bosworth homestead on the North Star Road. The original owner, Joshua Bosworth. It dated to 1810. Ernest Fabro owned it in 1966. Looked like a little wash on the line on the front porch there. Joshua was the first settler in Moores, arriving in 1796. The homestead remained in the family till 1940. Present owner made major repairs to the right wing when a tree fell on it in the 1950s.
yeah, the Fabros owned it for quite a while. I'm not sure. I have an idea who the present owner is, but again, I don't want to say the wrong name. But Al Fabro, my buddy, grew up in that house, and it's another one that you notice when you drive by because it kind of stands out.
Yeah. The next one is a nice brick home, the Fitch home off the North Star Road. Jabez Fitch built it in 1810. George Hogle owned it in 1966. A master builder, Jabez probably built his own and other homes and mills in the area, including those of Pliny Moore and Champlain. The Fitch family in 1853 sold this property to Thomas Sanders.
If you look at the map, it shows it more or less off the North Star Road. So
That's what it says, off the North Star Road, though. We don't know how far off the road it might be. That's all right. And next is number 115, the Samuel Churchill homestead on Route 22 north of Moores. Samuel Churchill built it in 1810. Charles Colgan owned it when this book was written. Samuel and his descendants occupied this home until 1930.
Okay.
Calvin's back with the map.
I'm just, 115. I'm not, it doesn't look, it's on the wrong side of the road to be where Ruth Colgan lives, so I'm not sure which,
Okay.
who owns it.
That's all right. Number 116, the John Churchill homestead in Moores Junction. John Churchill built it in 1805. Willis Smith owned it when the book was written. 3 Churchill brothers settled in Moores around 1797. John's house is reputedly the oldest house in town. Alonzo Stacy, who married Harriet Churchill, occupied it for many years. Next is the Shedden home in the village of Moores. The original owner was probably Jeremiah Churchill. It dates probably to 1810. Orville Netto, we know who Orville Netto is, owned it in 1966. John Shedden acquired the property probably with the home from Jeremiah Churchill in 1818. John's daughter Amelia occupied the home for many years. The L on the north end of the building was once a blacksmith shop.
Not sure who's there now, but it's not the Meadows.
No. Okay, next is Bromley Tavern, Route 22B. The original owner, Roswell Bromley.
We have gone from Moores. We went from
Scholar
Champlain to
Falls.
Moores, and now we, from some magic,
Turn the page, and
we went from Moores all the way to Schuyler Falls. So you have to have some rhyme or reason, and they just this is the route they took.
So 118 is Bromley Tavern, 22B. The original owner, Roswell Bromley, 1805. John Coffey owned it in 1966. For many years, Bromley operated a tavern there. It was originally a frame structure. Gradually, the building was extended back and sheds were added. Stephen Weaver acquired it 1855 and bricked over the structure in mid-century style. Next is the Turner Roberts homestead out on the Salmon River Road. Original owner was Ezra Turner, who built it in 1812. Stanley Newell owned it when the book was written. First settler in town, 1794. His original home was near this site, but south of the river. Turners owned the farm till 1822, Peter J. Roberts till 1865, and then Lyman Thompson. after that.
Okay, 1832, but that's all right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Not that anybody's taking notes and is going to say, oh, Gordy said 1822.
No, 1832. Sorry about that. Follow along, folks. Follow the bouncing ball.
You should each have your own
copy
at home and be following along with it.
Maybe some people do. That'd be nice. You wouldn't have to put all the pictures up. Okay, number 120 is the Roberts Lynch Farm on the Military Turnpike Extension. Look at the ivy all over that one. The original owner was Benjamin Roberts, 1820, Abel Toxapus. Wow, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that one, but that's another hard one. Toxapeus.
And I'm not even going to try to help you.
Okay, that's good. Benjamin, one of 5 brothers who were veterans of the Revolution, settled here in 1798, built this stone and brick home. Richard Lynch bought the farm in the 1830s, remained in his family for many years. The Mason Farm on Mason Street is number 121. The original owner, Aaron Mason. In 1806, Napoleon Agnew owned it. When the book was written, Aaron was a veteran of the Revolution and by 2 wives, the father of 18 children.
Ouch.
He was prolific. The family name was given to the street, as you can tell, and Spauldings later owned the farm for many years. Let's go to the Western Vaughn homestead on Mason Street. Elijah Weston owned it about 1805. Moss Vaughn owned it in 1966. The original house was probably framed, bricked over in mid-century. Weston's held the farm till 1863. 1867, L. Nathan Vaughn bought it, and it remained in the family until this book was written. The Weston Attic Home was on Mason Street. Elijah Weston owned it in 1812. The owner in 1966 was Francis Vance. This was Elijah's second farm adjoining the homestead. Whether members of his family lived here or rented it isn't known, but he sold it to Joshua Stickles in 1850. Between 1856 and 1915, First Lawton, then owner Attic, owned it.
Adcock,
I'm sorry.
Just like Joe Adcock, first baseman for the Milwaukee Braves.
You got it, baby. Okay, the Hammond Homestead is on Mason Street, another one with very interesting dormers. The original owner, Elijah Hammond, built in 1805. Francis Vance owned this one as well in 1966. The Hammond family owned this farm until 1920. The dormers and trim are mid-century additions. The Broadwell Homestead on Mason Street. Love this house. David Broadwell built it in 1804. E.B. King owned it when the book was written. David was a veteran of the Revolution and briefly of the War of 1812. Lived for a short time in a log house after his arrival from New Jersey in 1804 till the brick house was built. A man of great enterprise, he operated a forge, blacksmith shop, and sawmill. His son built the opposing stone house across the street, which we've talked about. Maybe we'll get to it. This one has numerous additions on it for folks who might want to drive up Mason Street and see what it looks like today. The Broadwell Terry Farm on Mason Street, built by Aaron Broadwell, 1805. Emmett Buckley owned it in 1966. Emmett and his wife, wonderful people for many, many years, the late Emmett Buckley. Aaron's farm was part of his father David's large farm. Aaron built a brick, but sold out when he moved away in 1813. Sometime around 1820, Josiah Terry got the farm, and it was in the Terry family till 1898. The brick was first replaced by stucco and more recently by asbestos siding. There's that dirty word. I spent a whole summer putting asbestos siding on homes in Long Island, breathing that stuff in with a skill saw, and we're still here today. Okay, the Wood Homestead of Woods Mills, another great structure. Built by Bezalel Wood III in 1800. New York State Electric and Gas owned it in 1966. Bezalel, a veteran of the Revolutionary War, settled here in the 1790s, built mills to use the power of the Saranac River. His son, Ira Allen Wood, took over most of the operations in 1818. After his death in 1854, the property passed to Jonathan Haynes, a descendant of Mary Wood. Great home. Now we get to the Morrison home that we talked to earlier, right up on top of the hill on Route 22B. Daniel Morrison built it in 1805. William Hogan owned it when this book was written, and I found out this morning in a post office that Jean Valdemir and her husband own it now, having purchased it in 1980, which is 28 years ago already. Now, this is reported to be the oldest home in Morrisonville. Daniel moved west in the 1830s. His son Isaac carried on. Morrisons owned the property till 1898. Then Joseph Rabideau, his son Herbert, lived in the house in 1966. Known affectionately to me and my family and my wife's sister and her husband Donald Dagenau as Uncle Herb. And Donald spent a lot of time growing up in that house, so I've been inside it, been around the property, and the old metal detector working there in the old days, etc.
So, this, I would assume, is the Morrison from Morrisonville?
That's the Morrison.
So this
Daniel Morrison, 1805.
This is where Morrisonville all began.
That's
right,
where it started,
that
right there.
Okay.
And it's not haunted either, that's very sad.
Oh, that's
She said, I wouldn't have moved in if it was haunted. I said, I would. Anyway, the next one is the Moore Homestead on 22B. Josiah Moore built it in 1808. William Hogan owned it in 1966. Oh, I think I wrote a ghost story about him. That's for another time and place. Mason Moore was born in this house, probably first to frame in 1808. Descendants of Joshua the pioneer owned the property till 1934. Probably bricked over by Mason around 1840. That house is still there, although there is a large development of homes in that area. And I believe it was William Hogan who died while burning grass outside that property at one time way back when, and his spirit allegedly haunts the area to this day.
Well, that's one of the reasons they don't want people burning grass.
You think so?
You could die.
Yeah. The Canfield Farm on 22B. Original owner Sylvanus Canfield.
Are you learning new names today, Gordy? Are you writing these down?
No, my poor head is...
I don't mean last names. I mean first names.
These first names. You know, people name their kids with strange names today, and I think they're kind of odd sometimes. Some of them are lilting and poetic and beautiful, but some of these older names are gone forever. You won't find that in any list of given names.
I don't usually get the names until they become teenagers, and I get to go get right down a roster, and I say, "Oh, what are these names?"
Okay.
And I learn new names every year,
all the time, yeah.
But they're already 15 years old when I learn them. But
it's amazing.
But then you read these old names, and like you said, it's just they're very strange to us now.
So Sylvanus Canfield built this on 22B in 1815. Albert Terrier owned it in 66. The original building was the section behind the porch to the left. The section on the right and the porch were added in mid-century. Several generations of Canfields owned that part. Next, the Hunter Homestead on 22B. Charles Hunter built it in 1817. Joe Pelkey owned it in 1966. Son of Edward Hunter, the famed Plattsburgh Tavern. Charles moved to Beckwith Street 1817, was known as Deacon Hunter for his devoted service to the early Baptist church near his home. The Weaver Homestead on 22B. I've been in that house. It's now rental property with several apartments. Wow. Yeah, I know where that is. Peter Weaver, 1808. Don Green owned it in 1966. Originally a large log house. By family tradition, Peter enclosed it in brick in 1818. And in mid-century added a new section to the front of the house, giving it a present appearance. It remained in the family till 1953. Back part was partly destroyed by fire in February 1966.
Okay, I would assume that's Don Green Sr.
Yep, from the Orchards.
Don Green Jr. and Trey Green are in Shazy, but this I believe would be Don G Orchards.
Yeah. And so let's go to the Elmore home. Original owner Asa Elmore, 1815, Lowell Fry, or Frey, off F-R-E-Y-E.
I'd be saying Fry.
Okay, owned it in 1966. Asa and his brother Lot acquired much of the land at modern Peru Village around 1810. We're in Peru now.
Yep, that's right.
We're down the road in Peru.
This is the first one in Peru.
The brick store still stands and now houses a liquor store. It says, Asa's home contained many of the fine classical features not often seen so early in Clinton County. It remained in the Elmore family till 1913, where it was bought by Dr. Edwin Sartwell, and his family owned it until 1961. That almost looks like the Parsons funeral home building a little bit, doesn't it, up there? We talked about that before.
You think they transposed the picture here?
Roughly the same style.
Yeah, but it's,
I doubt if they transposed the picture,
Peru,
but this one is in Peru.
Yeah.
I like it. Okay. Next is the Robert Platt home on Route 9. Original owner Robert Platt in 1809. George Copeland owned it in 1966. Robert, son of Zephaniah, the patroon, modeled his home after his father's downstate. It was a gambrel roof, plaster over the stone front, open stonework on the other side, subsequently the home of M.E. Bissell.
I have no idea what a gambrel roof is.
Well, a gambrel roof is, most people would associate a gambrel roof with a barn roof.
Hip roof?
Hip roof.
That's
what the gambrel roof looks like.
That's a hip roof.
That's a hip roof. And that's your story, and you're sticking with it. Joseph Platt home on Route 9 is the next one. Somebody penciled in here 1784 for some reason. It says it was built by Jonas Platt in 1820. Maybe that's when he first came here. 1784. Somebody penciled it in here.
He would have been only 15, though, so I don't know.
Well, I don't know. Anyway, the present owner in 1966 was Mrs. John Platt Myers. Jonas, another son of Zephaniah, built his home for retirement after an important judicial career elsewhere. Like his brother's home next door, it's stone, plaster over the front. Smith M. Weed used it for a summer home. Judge Alonzo Kellogg bought it 1869 and restored it, adding the two wings in about 1905. 1946, a Platt descendant, John Platt Myers, acquired the homestead. Nice home. The Fuller home on the Bedell Road. I hope I'm pronouncing these roads. I'm not familiar with that road. It's in Peru. In any case, original owner James Fuller, 1808. George Riley owned it when this book was written. James occupied the farm about 1800. The front of the building was the earliest frame home. The Fuller family owned the farm until 1960. Now the Allen farm on the Bedell Road. Original owner Jabez Allen, 1800. Paul Allen owned it when the book was written. Jabez, do they pronounce it Jabez or Jabez? I'm not sure.
Jabez.
Jabez obtained the farm on this site in 1788. Was related to Ethan Allen of the Green Mountain Boys who helped him get started. The house was remodeled late in the 19th century. Remained in the Allen family. Present owner and his children representing the 6th and 7th generation, it says. Okay. Next, the Cochran Ryder Farm on Telegraph Street, Peru. Original owner David Cochran, 1805. Mrs. Clarence Mace owned it in 1966. David Cochran moved to this site from Halleck Hill in 1803. His son sold the farm in 1833. 10 years later, John Ryder bought it, and still in the family, Mrs. Mace is a granddaughter of John Ryder, it says. And that brings us to number 139. We're still in Peru. The Bigelow Ackley Farm on Route 22. The original owner was Jonathan Bigelow. Built about 1820, and it was owned by Walter Bianchi, or W. Bianchi, in 1966. It was originally Edmund Clark's land. His son-in-law built here, receiving land and buildings by will in 1828. Bigelow's owned the farm on and off for years. Horace Ackley acquired it in 1861. Now the Barker home on the Barker Road, originally owned by Nicholas Barker, built in 1800. It was owned by David Sharp in 1966. Nicholas Barker came to Peru about 1792 and first built a log house, as many did at that time. Probably at the time of the Battle of Plattsburgh, Mrs. Bella Edgerton of Plattsburgh was brought to this house on a bed. 3 generations of Barkers occupied the property. Figure that out.
We won't even speculate on
why. Can't even imagine.
On the bed.
And next is number 141, the Mason Farm and the Turnpike Extension. Samuel Cochran owned it. 1808. and Don Green owned it in 1966. Samuel Cochran held his farm only until 1825. Aaron B. Mason bought it in 1827. Masons owned it till 1954. If you think it's taken you a long time to put these pictures on this thing, imagine what the late Dr. Allen Everest had to do in researching every single one of these pioneer homes.
Just incredible to go up and down the North Country and
knock on doors, talk to people.
Well, he does at the beginning mention the historians that he talked to in the area, and they did some legwork for him. But just still a tremendous amount of work here. I think I'll read that part again here. I've had for months. Let's see, assistance I've had for months from Miss Emily McMasters of Plattsburgh.
Oh, yes.
Miss B.F. Sullivan of Chazy, Mrs. Eleanor Spaulding of Ausable, Mrs. Marjorie Lansing Porter of Keysville, Mr. Andrew Broadwell of Rouse's Point, Mr. Fuller Allen of Plattsburgh, who helped greatly in tracing and verifying the ownership of the property, Mr. William Crosby of Plattsburgh, who has restored one of the fine old houses himself, and was great assistance in the photography work in this book.
So a lot of people helped, and I imagine he had students maybe helping out with some of the legwork too, but it's still a gigantic task.
Tremendous undertaking to get together and compile this 178 homes. It's just tremendous.
All right, we're at number 142 in Peru, the Cochran Farmhouse on the Turnpike Extension. Asa Cochran built it in 1803. Alfred LaDuke owned it in 1966. It says here, just one short sentence, Cochrans, with considerable financial strain, managed to hold on to this farm during most of the 19th century. And then we're on to the Ondley Mason homestead. That's E-O, not Oddly, but Ondley, O-N-D-L-E-Y, Route 22B. The original owner, Ondley Mason, in 1815. Mrs. Emma Dashnaw owned it when this book was written. Mason's first house apparently burned very early. His new home consisted of only the main section on the right until 1920, when the porch and kitchen wing were added. The Masons owned the farm till 1902, but had long been removed to another farm in town. The Dashnaws acquired it in 1912. Fish Farm on 22B, David Fish owned it in 1810. Mrs. Ellis Arnold, when the book was written. David Fish settled here about 1804. Original part of the building is the low L in the center, which you can see. Next was added the wooden annex in the rear, and about mid-century the main front part. At the same time, the middle section was brick to match the front. Present owner, a descendant of David Fish for the daughter of Silas Fish, married in Arthur, and their daughter is Mrs. Arnold. So the legend goes. Number 145, the Waterman Ells homestead in the... It's probably Eels.
Yeah,
yes, it is Eels. Eels. Waterman Eels homestead in Eels neighborhood. Original owner, Waterman Eels, 1803, Sarah Sibley. Oh, I knew Sarah very well. Aha, been in there, been there, done that. Revolutionary War veteran, Waterman arrived in Peru 1796. Son John lived on the farm for 100 years, from 1804 to 1904. Unless I miss my guess, and this goes way back to the 1960s, when I was there, and Sarah lived with her brother Carol, and they had historic newspapers and documents up in the attic, which I fairly drooled over. They would let me look through some of the old newspapers.
And drool on them?
I tried not to, but it was difficult. And I don't know whatever came from those things after they passed. Number 146, Nathan Eels' home on the Felton Road. Nathan Eels built it in 1817. Orville Burrow owned it when this book was written. My son Gregory and his wife Leslie lived in this house for quite some time when they were first married. Doesn't it look like a blockhouse? It's wonderful, big, 3-foot thick walls, and I wish they'd been able to hold on to it. Nathan came to Peru with his father Waterman in 1796. In 1817 he married and built his house. Son owned it till 1911 and deeded it to Warden, that's W-O-R-D-E-N, Warden Hunter. Next is the John Eales homestead, Brand Hollow Road. John Eales built it in 1810. Francis Hughes owned it when the book was written. Another Revolutionary War veteran, John, arrived in town 1796 as a part of the family migration, married in 1804, and at first lived in a log house. 3 generations of Eales lived in that house. The Arnold home on 22B, built by Elijah Arnold in 1810. Don Green owned that one when the book was written. Elijah arrived in Peru 1795 with all his possessions wrapped in a handkerchief. Remember those old cartoons of the hobos on a stick? He prospered as a farmer, occupied many public positions, including that of U.S. Senator. Early in the 20th century, the Clark family created a large apple orchard, which still occupies most of the original farm.
There are a few orchards there in Peru.
Yes, I would say. The Button homestead is on 22B. Elijah Button built it in 1805. Dr. Townsend Carpenter owned it when the book was written. Ebenezer Olmsted first bought a farm in 1795, which Button obtained in 1803. Elijah undoubtedly built the present structure. He ran a hotel and a store, farmed, made potash, served as sheriff and justice of the peace, and of many jack of all trades. Nearby Button Brook carries his name. Okay. Next is the Half, H-A-F-F farm on the Union Road. Original owner John Half Jr., 1804. John Nienhouse owned it later when this book was written. John Half, a Dutch descent, settled on the property in 1793. There was a grant for his services during the Revolution. He was a slave owner and a thrifty farmer noted for his famous Dutch barn. John Jr. built the present house, and his son Schuyler lived there 90 years in the same house. And the lady who owned this book, originally E.M. Doran, it says February 1967, room 302 at the junior high school, also signed name in the same red ink on this page, wanting us to know that this book probably got hoisted by some student way back when. Okay, the Half Smith home is on the Union Road. Original owner, Abraham Half, 1819. Richard and Avery Stafford owned it in 1966. In 1819, John Half deeded part of his farm, probably including the front part of this building, to his son Abraham. The latter was a farmer and also local circuit preacher. 1852, he sold the farm to Stephen Key Smith, who operated a station for runaway slaves. His place of concealment was in the barn that still stands on the property. His heirs owned the farm till 1947 when Walter Stafford bought it.
And last year with Addie Shields, I went with her, and we took a picture of where they were hiding the slaves in that barn. So
did you really?
It's still there.
Oh, wonderful. Now the Stoddard home on the Jarvis Road. Noble Averill owned it in 1805. Earl Ladd owned it in 1966. Averill seems to have bought this farm from Benjamin Brown. Averill probably built part of this house and operated a tavern. Chauncey Stoddard bought it in the 1820s. More recent owners included Nathan Bigelow and Arthur Jarvis. Halleck Hill Homestead on the River Road. Peter Halleck built it in 1800. Robert Sherman owned it in 1966. Peter, the early Quaker pioneer, settled on this farm in 1794. Married Mary Keyes, raised a large family. His son George succeeded to the farm, was active in public affairs, and served his district in the New York State Legislature. The Rufus Green homestead on the Union Road was built by Rufus Green in 1805. Ray Trombley owned it in 1966. Rufus purchased the farm from Isaac Underhill in 1803, probably built a part of the structure soon after that, sold it in 1822. Subsequent owners were Nathaniel Hanson and George Beadleston, who bought it in 1853. Beadleston was an architect who probably enlarged and embellished the house. Henry Green homestead on the Union Road. Henry Green built it in 1803. George Curtis, a gentleman whom I knew quite well, the late George Curtis, owned it in 1966. Henry settled here around 1800. The Green farm later was called the Hayworth farm after Hiram Hayworth bought it. Here it is, the Keys Farm on the Davern Road, originally owned by William Keys, 1800. Frank and Anna Davern were the present owners in 1966. William built a log cabin on this site in 1789. Here he brought his bride in 1790. Thus began settlement of the Union. From William, the property went to Michael Davern, for whom the road is named. Great structure, been all through it. Love that place.
You'd have to assume this had something to do with Keysville. So.
Of course it is.
Yeah, so I wonder if he and Mr. Morrison got along well, since they each had their own villas.
Yeah, that's possible. I hope they did. They were probably contemporaries too. Arnold Homestead on Halleck Hill. Original owner was David Harkness, 1804. Ray Arnold and Miss Grace Arnold owned it in 1966. The Quakers settled there, as historians and interested people in that area know. David, a Quaker preacher and farmer, settled there in 1799. His fine home was built of a pink stone found on his own property. When he decided to move to Michigan, he sold the farm to Eliezer Arnold. Today's owners represent the fourth and fifth generations from Eliezer, it says.
And of course, Harkness, another community in that area.
Absolutely. And the Harkness Homestead, number 1 on Halleck Hill. Original owner Daniel Harkness, 1803. Philip Pulsiver owned it in 1966. Daniel followed his brother David to Ausable in 1801 until at least 1803. Lived in a log house already standing on the farm. Later he built the rear portion of this house of logs, which he clapboarded over in 1833. I'm pausing because I didn't know that was a verb. He clapboarded it over. In 1820 he moved to his large home, number 159, the next one we'll talk about, but his son Nehemiah occupied this house from his marriage in 1832 to 1848, when he too moved to the large house. The house left the family for a time, but was owned by Charles and Everett Harkness in the 20th century.
And we should point out that we are in Ausable with the two Harknesses here. We've moved
the
to
Arnold
Ausable.
Homestead and Halleck Hill and so on. All right, the next one is the Harkness Homestead number 2 on Halleck Hill. Original owner Daniel Harkness, 1820. Ernest Harkness owned it when the book was written. Daniel moved to the new house in 1820. His son Nehemiah persuaded the railroad builders to install a flag stop at the foot of Halleck Hill, and the station and community were named Harkness. So there you go. The present owner is the 5th generation from the original builder, it said. Next is the Thew home on Halleck Hill. Garrett Thew built it in 1806. Demas Martin owned it in 1966. Gilbert and Garrett Thew settled on the site in 1789, were thus the pioneers on Halleck Hill. Gilbert's stone house has disappeared, but Garrett's, with a mid-century porch, is pictured here. Brothers were the Dutch ancestors of all the Thews in the North Country, and there were and are many.
Including Patty.
Oh, yes.
And I just wonder if this home is still there. It looks like the grass is growing and the upstairs looks like the windows are boarded up. So.
I bet you Patty would know. She probably knows the family history.
Give us a call. Let us know.
The daughter of Lester E. The husband of, well, you know. 161, yes, Chip. The Purley home is on Halleck Hill. Original owner, Society of Friends. The Quakers once again, right?
Yep.
The date, 1812 and 1836. Mrs. Harold Purley owned it in 1966. The building was opened as the Friends Academy of the Union in 1812. Originally a 2-story structure. The girls had classes upstairs, the boys downstairs. Tuition $2 a quarter. The board nearby was $1.25 a week. In 1836, the Osborne brothers took the building down and moved it about 2 miles, where they converted it to the present dwelling. John Osborne lived there until he died in 1883. The Isaac Halleck home on Halleck Hill. Original owner was Isaac Halleck, 1815. John McCormick owned it when this book was written. Isaac came over from Vermont with his brother Edward in 1797. Originally, they operated a large farm jointly. After its division, Isaac farmed his part prudently and built this modest but solid frame house. His descendants still live in the county. The next is the Edward Halleck home in the Union and Halleck Hill Roads. Original owner Edward Halleck, 1815. Robert Roger Bazzaio owned it when the book was written. Everest settled on this site in 1797. After making considerable money in the War of 1812, he built the house on a grand scale. The cellar alone cost $1,000. Consequently, lost his farm through a mortgage foreclosure. Boy, we're hearing a lot of that these days. He lived there for years in a small house nearby and died in an asylum in 1845. Next is number 164, the Stephen Taylor Farm on Taylor Hill. Owned by Stephen Taylor in 1799. William Davey owned it in 1966. Stephen settled here in 1798. This home was on the assessment rolls in 1799, making it the oldest house on the hill.
You know what, Gordy?
What?
The picture in your book is not the picture in my book.
Come on.
They went out and they had the wrong house apparently when they put out the first book.
Oh, you gotta be kidding.
Because I was noticing my book has a snowbank.
And mine doesn't.
Right, and then I started looking at the rest of the house, and they'd gone to the wrong place. So my book is better than yours, even though it's soft cover.
Better than your book. Which one are you going to show on television?
I've got my book, so yours isn't going to be shown.
Oh, isn't that funny? Stephen Taylor built it 1799. William Davey let me see, the Taylors owned it till 1844. A year later, John Dodge got it. His family occupied it for many years. What if yours is right and they just slipped another one in by mistake?
Well, mine would be right because it's the updated version.
Yours is the newer version. Right. Okay. Who knows who owned that house that is in my book? Okay, but for a fee, I'll show you a picture of it in person, folks, anytime. Okay, 165 is the Hayes home on Taylor Hill. William Banker owned it in 1810. Raymond Bazzaio owned it when the book was written. Big porch on there. Banker settled here early in the century, probably started this house. The next owner was Robert Everett. Lost it for debt, 1821. Robert Battery next owned it till he died in 1836. Jeremiah Hayes acquired it and occupied it for many years. They had to go to the clerk's office and look at deeds to figure some of this stuff out.
Sure.
The Taylor Farm on Taylor Hill. Original owner William Taylor, 1805. Julius Tellier owned it when the book was written. William also settled here 1798. The hill is named for him and his brother, Taylor Hill. He owned this farm till 1853. Later owners included L. Bannon, Emmons, and Moses Latterell. Okay, the Beardsley Homestead, Route 9N. Jehiel Beardsley built it in 1805, and Mrs. Frank Saltmarsh owned it when this book was written. Jehiel was one of four brothers who settled in the Osable Valley. Jehiel bought this farm in 1791. His son Joseph bought him out in 1849, occupied the farm for years. Continuing in Osable, the Mace Homestead. Route 9N, original owner John Mace. 1815, Dr. George Preston owned it when this book was written. John and James Mace, you've heard of the Mace Chasm Road. John and James Mace acquired a large farm around 1807. John's original house was the four-room section on the left. Two other buildings were later joined to it to make the present structure. His descendants owned the property till about 1917 when the Prestons acquired it. Hayes Homestead, Route 9N, original owner Jonathan Hayes, 1805. Mrs. Raymond Prey then bought it later and owned it in 1966. Jonathan and two brothers settled in the area around 1800. Jonathan built this massive stone house with 30-inch walls where he operated a tavern. The bar can still be seen in the basement. His farm contained the fording place, the main north-south road at the time. I wonder if that was the Prey homestead that we did our show next to the Prey farm. I don't know. It's hard to tell from this view, but it could be. Okay. I'll bet you I'll find out from the Preys because they'll call me and tell me.
Of course that is.
Yes, the Hayes Homestead, 47 Main Street, Keysville. Original owner of the firm of Keys, Anderson and Keys, 1815. Mrs. Giselle O'Hara owned it in 1966. Reputedly the oldest house in Keysville, it was originally company property. Ahaz A's acquired it in 1838. A later owner, Mr. McMahon, added the porch in 1886. The Adgate Homestead, Ausable Chasm, is number 171. The original owner, Matthew Adgate, in 1810. The present owner in 1966 was Mrs. Carolyn Schermerhorn. Adgate's original home was a 2.5-story structure, a story and a half structure. In owner after 1863, Lemuel Page extended the ground floor, added a story and a back wing, gave it a Victorian look. His daughter married Azel Adgate, and the property was again occupied by descendants of the original family. Today's owner is the great-great-great-granddaughter of Matthew Adgate, it says.
And the same family is there. We probably added another great or two.
Another great or two among friends. The Morehouse Ricketson home at the Arthur and Chasm Roads. The owner was William Morehouse when it was built in 1800. John Allen owned it in 1966. William Morehouse bought a large farm in 1792, occupied this part of it till 1808. James Ricketson acquired it in 1836, and it remained in the family till 1882. Next is the Morehouse homestead on the Arthur Road. Jonathan Morehouse built it in 1805. Ralph Arthur owned it when the book was written. William Morehouse deeded a part of his farm to Jonathan in 1797. Methodist meetings were held for a time in his barn. He met the bishop at Peru Landing when he came to dedicate the Peru Methodist Church in 1813. Subsequent owners were the Irish and then the Arthur families. And then the Arthur home and the Arthur Road. Original owner Joshua Arthur, 1804. Mrs. Frank Curran owned it in 1966. Joshua, one of 4 brothers who settled in Ausable in 1790. Their farms met at Arthur's Corners, but this is the only original home left. The Arthurs occupied the farm till 1908. 175 is the Ricketson home in the Arthur Road. Okay. Abednego. Boy, how's your Bible history? Abednego. Remember, he's one of the ones that went into the fiery furnace.
I don't know that.
Yes. Boy, Abednego Ricketson. I haven't seen that name in print since I was 5 years old. Built it in 1805. John Shortell owned it when this book was written. Ricketson settled here in 1797, built his home in sections. The part on the left is being the first one. A wing on the right was later moved away and made a separate house, which was disappeared. The Ricketsons occupied the property until 1875. Turning the last page, number 176, the Richard Keyes homestead on the Union Road. Richard Keyes built it in 1795. Merritt Keyes owned it when the book was written. If it's still standing, it's a miracle. It looks a little disheveled. Richard Keyes settled here 1792. First lived in a log house. Soon he built this framed and plastered house, probably the oldest building in Ausable. Richard later moved to Keysville. His home remained in the family but was put to secondary uses. Now a hen house in 1966. Pretty old hens if they're still there. Owned by the 6th and 7th generation of the same family.
Well, it could still be used as some kind of an outbuilding.
It could be.
And it's, hopefully it is still standing. From 1795, you hope.
That's amazing.
You hope that building's still around.
I'll take a ride and look for it sometime. Next is the Brown Farmhouse on the Union Road. Uriah Waterman and Daniel Wood owned it in 1796. Joseph Sorrell owned it when this book was written. Reputedly the oldest inhabited house at the Union. Its basement was originally used by its owners as a blacksmith shop. Some of their equipment still on the premises. A later owner, Henry Brown, gave his name to the house and to the road nearby.
Wasn't that nice of him to do that?
That was very nice. And guess what, Calvin? Number 178.
They said they couldn't be done.
It said, yeah, you're right. The Signer House. Signer Homestead on the Signer Road. John Henry Signer built it in 1818. Mrs. Constance Signer Boyd owned it when the book was written. The Signers, it says in parentheses, Sickeners. That's probably an early pronunciation, maybe, huh?
Could be.
Were descendants of the Palatine Germans who emigrated to New York in 1710. John's wife Sally was a descendant of Roger Williams. Boy, there's a famous name in history, not to be confused with the pianist. John's original home was the main section on the right-hand side that you can see. The porch and wing were later additions. The present owner is of the 6th generation from the Pioneer.
And both of our books conclude at the same time. Isn't that amazing?
Is it that amazing? Mine's got a much harder cover.
And it's Pioneer Homes of Clinton County, 1790 to 1820. Dr. Allen Everest put all this together with help, as we mentioned earlier. This is published by the Clinton County Historical Association. We're doing this as a 2-part series with their permission. And I think it's just a fascinating compilation, and you know, we owe so much to people like Dr. Everest who've done all this work so that we can all know and remember the history.
People who are not natives of Clinton County or northern New York will like this for obvious reasons. They can learn something of its history. People who've lived here all their lives love it because they've seen some of these houses. And there are people who are viewing this program right now, part 2 of this series of Pioneer Homes of Clinton County, who grew up in some of these houses, whose ancestors might have built some of these houses. So there is a general interest from the professional historians and those who have a peripheral interest, if you will, for the reasons I mentioned and many others. It's possible that these books will be available for sale somewhere on eBay, as your copy was.
I'm trying to think if I've ever seen one, because I do look for Shazy and Moores once in a while for Champlain on the internet, because Champlain just gives you so much.
Certainly.
You spend half an hour trying to go through all the Champlain stuff because of the lake and everything else. And a lot of people sell stuff, come down from Canada and sell it in Champlain, so you punch in Champlain and
you get there too, yeah.
But anyway, I'm trying to remember if I've ever seen it on there. I think I may have seen it one time, so it doesn't get on there very often. And again, as of we're taping this, the Historical Association did not have any for sale, but they did have some to go in there and sit and look at. But I would, Cornerstone would be a good place to
talk to Nancy Donahoe, our good friend, who's a little bit shy about being interviewed, although we have managed to capture her there behind the counter once or twice. Mm-hmm. But she's been dedicated to the history of Clinton County by way of selling these old books for a long time. Well, we were planning to get into something else, but we ran out of time on this particular tape, so our thanks to all those people who watch this program, to those people who contribute to the suggestions of this program, and especially the people who send checks to Hometown Cable on the Ridge Road in Champlain to help keep this program going week after week. We've enjoyed the Pioneer Homes and every other show we've done in history. Thanks to Calvin for being with us, actually on camera, for this program. And who knows where we're going to be next time for our little corner.